Great, there it is.
Okay, you're good to go.
We are live, everybody. Welcome to the City of Salem Urban Renewal Agency West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board. It is September 6th. We have a quorum. Roll call has been taken. It's great to see everybody. I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend. Has everybody... looks like we're missing a few, but we hope they're having fun or doing something productive. Did everybody get a chance to review the agenda?
Yes, I can make a motion to accept agenda.
Do I hear a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, great. Any discussion, additions? All in favor? Just a quick eye or raise a hand.
Aye.
All right, great. Moving forward, approval of the August 2nd minutes.
I'll move to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Great hearing. I just like to make a comment. It's always interesting that these are the most blank minutes I read, and I love them because most of the minutes I read are like very, very lengthy from the other boards I participate in. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. Motion passes. Minutes from August 2nd are approved. Do we have any public comment this morning? Tori?
I haven't received anything. Linda, I don't know if you have. I think you probably would have sent it to me if you had received anything. I have not seen anything.
You know, and I would have to say that disappoints me. I would love to see more public comment come in. And so if anybody out there is watching this YouTube video or listening to the audio, please feel free to write us a letter. On how you feel redevelopment is going in West Salem, your challenges as a resident, a business owner. I would even love to see anybody from this board present public comment on issues, opportunities, challenges that we see. Sitting on the board, this would be a great time to bring that up, and I welcome anybody from who sits on the board to present that. And this would be a great time for that as well. Moving on, we have no action items. And so now we just have discussion items, it looks like. Tori, is this kind of where I turn it over to you as far as review the West Salem Urban Renewal Plan and West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board bylaws?
Right. Yeah, so this might get bleed together, so I'll try to separate it out as I'm talking, so that for those, if you happen to be following along, if you're curious to know where we are on the agenda, 6, 1, 2, and 3, well, not 3, 6, 1, and 2 might be combined, just because I could do the formal approach, but the conversation is a bit more fluid. I also wanted to start, if it's okay with you guys, if you have a chance to review the bylaws, and we'll start with the urban renewal plan. If you have any questions about what it is or a safe space, so it's one of those things where everyone's been involved and doing a lot. So when we take these deep dives into what the point is, questions come up. And even having been on the board, I'm also on the advisory board. I used to live in Salem for almost 10 years, and now I've been in Dallas almost 10 years. And so I'm on the advisory board for the urban renewal area there. So it's an interesting dynamic. Here I help out and facilitate, but there, it's this formal process. It's funny because I assist with you guys. So I would think that I'd be more familiar, but then when you're actually in the hot seat, it's just a different dynamic. So like, I forget Robert's rules, like not the decorum part, but just the whole formality, like motion. Anyway, so I get it. So if there's anything on your mind, I'd love to start that way and then let you know maybe where we would address it. That will help process, if you have anything. If anything comes up too, as far as questions or comments, feel free to stop me for clarity or anything else. Before I jump in on the topic of the public comment, it's interesting because when there's something like an idea that's new, so when we floated it to like Second Street, to the broader community of different groups when we were doing the outreach, then we saw a little bit more. And now the construction is happening. But my guess is maybe because the part of the section of Second Street is being constructed right now is where there wasn't a street before through the business area, the industrial area, and it hasn't really impacted the residential area much other than diverting traffic and people had to drive over there. So maybe we'll see more. I agree, it would be great to get more feedback that way. Okay, so share my screen. Okay, starting out. So the urban renewal area generally. So we talk a lot about the district. This is the boundary, and it goes a little bit further. The area, if you go out, if you travel west to connect to 22 from West Salem, and you go through this section, the new development actually going in now it's really, my understanding is an extension of the kind of, I don't know if it's not necessarily a strip mall, but that type of development out that way to the west is continuing. So there is more section to the district to the west there that falls out that way. But as far as the makeup, you have the commercial areas, a kind of gateway area coming from west to east. Then you have the single family residential, large section of the district also to the west. Then you start to get into the industrial, and as that's transitioning really on the fringes is what we've seen is to the north and the south, there have been changes and the whole zone change has happened. We started with our zone code cleanup project around 2016, 2017, and that brought in more mixed use in the area, just anticipating over the 20-year horizon that those uses would change. And it was about that time that Oregon Fruit had moved to another part of Salem, and other things are happening. So it just helped influence that change. And then obviously the more recent comprehensive plan update for the city of Salem, the Our Salem effort, made more of that mixed use area. And then as you go east of Wallace Road, again, more mixed use, downtown style, anticipated as far as zoning setup, but it's kind of referred to as, just like that community area. You have access to recreation with the park, commercial, a lot of different commercial retail services, grocery, multifamily out that way. So just a broad range of different things happening in that section east of Wallace. So this is the area. And what's important about that is, so we follow Oregon Revised Statute Section 457. That was the formation of statewide urban renewal efforts. And so when you have time, you can go through state law, read about it. Occasionally things, that section of the code gets updated, added to facilitate more things as far as urban renewal is concerned. What you have to understand is there's a section on blight, and blight has a few different meanings in the code. There's the obvious one, and in this case, what would be notable for Salem, anyone going to West Salem, is like the old, not quite derelict, but getting there as far as the Rain Suite building. That's kind of the blighted, and a lot of those older industrial buildings to the west of Rain Suite. So we're hoping that this public investment, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in Second Street, will help trigger private investment in those buildings and overcome that blight. And what the urban renewal does too is, we won't get into it too much, but each city with land use in Oregon has an urban growth boundary. So it gets expensive. Most in the community, when you're small, have this feeling of a small town, single story housing. Eventually it has to start accommodating wide ranges of housing, multifamily. You start to push that boundary before you can go to the state to request that the urban growth boundary expand to accommodate, so you're supposed to have 20-year land supply of all the different uses, commercial, retail, industrial, housing. So you have to make the case to the state that you've gotten to that point where you don't have a 20-year land supply and you can make a justification to expand. Well, you can't do that if you haven't addressed infill redevelopment. You have to treat your urban core wisely, so developing a wise pattern, but also you have to make those investments before you can successfully make the case that it's justified to expand. So that's where urban renewal helps. Urban renewal helps eliminate blight in the sense of derelict buildings that are in disrepair, but also in land utilization to further protect farmlands. It's needed to have like a financial mechanism to facilitate infill redevelopment. So like these areas that we're starting to see in West Salem shift from like an old industrial use over the decades that's been in disrepair. It takes a lot for someone to take that project on. There's environmental issues, building issues. So there's cleanup. They have to rework the site. Same is true too, and also with a vacant site. So vacant meaning like a greenfield. So I do a lot of work in Southeast Salem where the Mill Creek Corporate Center is. That's blight in a whole different way. Just as far as the land utilization piece, we're sitting on state surplus land that was intended for additional corrections facilities that are now, that burden is being shared by the rest of the state. So in that sense, it'd be a stretch to make the argument that this is blighted land when it's just a open field. That's a nice view for a lot of people that lived out there. But when you're talking protecting surrounding farmlands, other natural resources outside the urban core, the urban growth boundary, it's really intended to urbanize. You have to do what you can. You still protect cultural resources, natural resources, all those things to the extent possible. And like in this case, there's a Willamette Greenway. There's state law that protects those big waterways as corridors, and reflected also in our own code. But beyond that, perennial creeks, your typical natural resources, of course, are protected, wetlands, things like that. But other areas, it's really intended to do what you can to make your land work for urban purposes in the boundary. So that way you prevent sprawl, protect farmland outside of it. So in that situation, then the land that was intended for corrections facilities, surplus by the state, could be used for other purposes, getting jobs, economic development, helping the community in different ways in an urban way. So a little bit different in this dynamic. It's almost, West Salem obviously was a city before incorporated with the Salem. So that's why you see this broad range here as right at the front, at the core. This is the boundary they work in. So when we talk about back before you guys were here, there was the talk of the third bridge. It was going to be further north. So there wasn't really any connection, but there were elements to 2nd Street that would have connections, that would have had connections to that third bridge. So that's where like the urban renewal investment could have helped the 22 approach to the third bridge. So those kind of things. So it's very specific, and we'll get into the plan to show also but I just wanted to emphasize, right now too, there's talk about the general fund, and there have been things adopted to that. These funds can't be used for that. These have very specific purposes to fund projects in the plan. That's what it was created for. And so it's like its own pot of money that can't really be used. There have been times, and I think other communities lend and borrow. So you could have like a general fund borrow from urban renewal. It just gets really complicated. There's still a legal agreement, there's performance, and it has to pay back that money to the urban renewal district. So it's just one of those things that as a city we've moved away from, but you'll see it in other smaller communities where they still do some of that, lending borrowing back and forth, but it's still very much a, it has to go through a process and be accepted. But we're not tied up in that respect with West Salem. Any questions about the boundary? This was established in 2001. I think what I'll talk about too, really quickly, is tax increment. Are you guys familiar with how funding works as far as urban renewal and tax increment is concerned?
Give us a quick overview, Tori.
Okay. So what it is 2001 when it was established, this district. So there's all properties that were taxable paying in their property tax. That continues to this day to go to all the taxing jurisdictions, school districts, any, city of Salem, state, fire district, if there, was one here. Those funds continue to go through Polk County. They all get their share around for the 2001 tax share. So any new growth since 2001, that's captured for the purposes of doing the projects in the renewal plan. So that's what the incremental growth. So at first, when this is created 2001, you're not really going to see much. I think by state law, property taxes can only be increased in assessed value by 3% per year. So it's a very slow growth rate in that respect. That's where, and we'll get into a little bit more, like new investments, redevelopment, that will trigger into assess, and that can help increase that amount quicker than waiting for that slow 3% per year increase max, if it even goes up that high per year. So as that gradually, if you were to look at it, it'd be kind of like a ramp chart. As you go into the later years, that's when you start to, property values go up a little bit more, projects then can be done, and then hopefully that's reflected in a prior development where that new assessed value, that new development can bring in additional tax contributions. So it's really good to clarify if it ever gets brought up, like in this case where there's talk about general fund funding, one, it's not a separate tax. It's just the property tax is being used differently. If you happen to live in a renewal area, you would see it. If you were to pull a title report, you'd see it that you're in a unique district. We've gotten questions about that. Oh, it's not a different tax. It's just your property taxes are managed a little bit differently. They go to this district as well as the other places. So that's the gist of it. And we'll get into the plan itself and how, funds are directed to those type of projects. So the community and their efforts to create this probably at least 5 years before the 2001 establishment date helped frame this. It's very much a public process. If we were to do like a major amendment and boundary change, that'd be a public process. We'd have to engage all the taxing districts. So that was done to establish this plan. So I just did this quick breakdown. There's a lot more detail and I'm happy to go over the detail, but it's one of those where I want to gauge it. I don't want to go through it too much because if anyone is watching, or maybe you guys are familiar with it and you don't want to go into too much detail, this is just a quick breakdown of the projects in the plan. So we have public improvements generally at the beginning, and this is, I think it's section 700 of the plan. So in 701 is public improvements. Well, I mean, a lot of this gets into more detail of what those public improvements entail. So I won't spend too much time on that aspect of it. Like park improvements, for example, as the next one. So among some of the things, there was desire for an Edgewater pedestrian plaza, I think probably tied to like what we've got now, where there's the market on the Thursday market along the Edgewater Parkway. Plazas have been an interesting one. It doesn't really get, that's the thing about plans too, it doesn't get specific because it's, you want as a community, this was expressed as a desire, but it doesn't get into, we want this location. Typically what happens is you capture it and then there has to be like a study to understand location, how it would work, how much it would cost, because then you frame that conversation of, like you guys as an advisory board, we'll get into that a little bit more too. You advise the urban renewal agency, which is the city council. So ultimately, they're the ones who decide. These things are all important, but we want to prioritize funding in these things, and that's what has happened since 2001. Is we've had the advisory board as they look at different needs throughout the community, and as the funding has come in, those have been prioritized as a recommendation. It goes to the urban renewal agency, and they've made decisions to do certain things. I don't know the full. There's an Edgewater community plan that was created before the urban renewal plan, and there might be some tied to the pedestrian plaza. I know that there's been a long desire in broader Salem, not just West Salem, but also in downtown Salem, to have some kind of public space as a plaza. And it's a difficult one. So that's something that's in the plan. We can talk about it. We could study it. We could see where it fits, when it fits. Now that there's a little more activity with and more familiarity with the Thursday market, maybe there's a rationale. It's just locating the spot, making sure it's safe, accessible, usable. So that's one of the elements as far as park improvements. In the area, as far as the district itself, you have the West Salem Park, the Edgewater Parkway, and the Wallace Marine Park. Those are the biggest, most notable parks. Parks can still be built, but that goes back to the comprehensive plan. The long range planning guide what we can do. You can't work against that, and that's true too. Like the Parks Master Plan. So all these things, the transportation system plan, that's part of the comprehensive plan, and that's getting updated now. I think parks. I don't know when the Parks Master Plan was updated, but it's just one of those things where we, not me necessarily, but me as staff, I'm advisory to. I work as an advisor capacity for you guys, and as well as the urban renewal agency. So you guys could frame what you want to see and make that recommendation to the agency. They make a decision, but we as staff too do the same. And one of those things we can't do is say, we want to force a park here. If it doesn't fit as far as resources, it's one thing to create something, but if you don't have the staff and you don't have a plan, and you don't have the maintenance, you don't have you have it, but then well, first they have to get the approval from the agency to even do it. But but then if it didn't fit within all the framework of everything else, it would be one of those things that look nice for a few years, and then because you don't have the resources to care for it.
Hey, Tori, I've got a quick question. So just like an example on that, when we look at the URA plan includes lighting and enhancements to parks. If we're not looking at building a new park, we could make recommendations for additional amenities at an existing green space. Correct? Like
right.
At one of the projects that urban renewal or that is listed as completed on the City of Salem website is wayfinding signage, and I think that on the Edgewater Greenway there are maps both at the Rosemont exit and Edgewater, and then kind of along that Edgewater that help direct people, and that was done through URA. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. Yep.
And did that come about was that recommendation made through the West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board originally? Do you know?
Yeah, so it was about the time that I was starting with the city when I started to do more in West Salem. So downtown was doing their wayfinding signage, and so in an effort to have that all cohesive, you'll see a lot of the same. If you're downtown walking, you'll see similar signage. If there's historical, I think when you go to the old West Salem City Hall, I think there's it speaks to the history of City Hall in that area along I think probably about the Willamette Greenway area too. So you'll have like at the bus stop near the City Hall, you have a sign, and then you have a lot of the wayfinding, even you can go down by 2nd Street and even the West Salem Park. They have those same kind of signs that direct you if you want to go to, if you wanted to go to Edgewater or if you wanted to get to Wellspring Park, you'll see it in a lot of different locations in Patterson, Edgewater. Yeah. So that was part of that effort to make those similar, because over time, the West Salem area is becoming more kind of the downtown for West Salem. And so in an effort to make that the same, I think, renewal funds were used to do the wayfinding sign there.
So for example, something, if we were to come forward as an advisory board and say, we'd really like to see restrooms or a sound barrier along the green space. Now I know a sound barrier would get a little, that kind of, there's that's an ODOT city kind of collaboration, but is that something that would be considered like an urban renewal, could be considered as an improvement?
So I'd have to look at the plan specifically. I don't know that like the wall part would, but and then you got into some of the complexity around the Edgewater Parkway. But we have done a lot of work actually at Wellspring Park with their renewal. I think that we can't do repair. That's one of the things that's also why we work with parks, and the urban renewal agency has to take into context everything, because we have to be able to make an investment that can be sustained. So and it had to be something that one is reflected, like parks improvement, lighting. So we have done restrooms. We've done the multi-use path that's in Wellspring Park. We did that. We did the improvements that this side to connect to the Union Street Bridge. So that was an urban renewal project. So yes, we've done those, and it just has to, that's just part of it. So it has to be one, you can make any type of recommendation you want. It just has to be within the plan. And then it has to be not a maintenance thing, it has to be like a new build. And then ultimately those recommendations go to the agency. But yes, we could do all those things, not the wall. I think that would be a stretch. I don't think it's in the plan. But other enhancements, lighting, safety, new paths, bathrooms, yes, bike facilities, yeah. So
Very
that's
cool. Thank you. I just kind of wanted to put how could we
context, what I mean,
context of how could this advisory board, I mean, because to be honest with you, I think we should be drafting letters. Let's advise this, let's advise this, how do we want to see, how can this with the information that you're providing us and working cohesively with your office, how can we make these recommendations moving forward to city council?
So I would say let's start with the study, and I would say too, like if you have an idea that you feel, that's the nice thing about having this is you guys are advisory, you come from the community representing your various backgrounds, so you have that perspective you're bringing, and I think that's what's valuable about that. I would say make sure you do your homework, so you don't want to come forward to say this is really needed, I think we should do this, build this, and it's one, maybe outside the district, or two, it's not a project in the plan. So make sure you do the background. Don't talk about it among your other agency members, because then if you have too many on board, you're essentially creating a public meeting without notice, and you can get in trouble that way. So we'll bring in Brian Luce for that exciting conversation as far as like ethics and public meeting law. Later, that's typically the December meeting, so you don't want to do that. But also, so you want to make sure it's grounded in the plan, and it makes sense, fits the district, and then really, it's at that point these agendas are pretty open. I would say probably starting with a study to say I know that the Edgewater Parkway path has come up in the past as far as like having ADA accessibility or other safety issues, because it's old and there's upheaval to sidewalks. So to say, I want to make a recommendation to, and it's just hypothetical, do a whole new path that's safe and ADA accessible. I mean, you could do that anytime. You can make a motion in the meeting. And then yeah, of course, it would take someone to second it for there to be like to actually start to form and have a discussion and have it formalized as a group. You know, if it's just one person saying it and no one seconds it, it just goes away because there wasn't support for it. But yeah, I think doing research, understanding what the constraints are and what you can do, but then beyond that, probably starting with a recommendation to study something. So, for example, Samantha, she's not here, has had a lot of interest in gateway signs, and we'll talk about that. There's it's referenced in the plan in the streetscape section. We've been doing research for a while to find spots. There was a location that she had intended at as you come off the exit ramp into West Salem at Wallace, but that's ODOT controlled and it's not safe. So we've been looking all over the place and even creatively to see maybe what about wall art or other type of public art or things that can show that you're in the West Salem district without having like this, because there's the other piece of it. You know, with a park, for example, you might want to see like a new park at some location, but you know, if you make the recommendation, we can do park improvements in the plan, but then it will get an obstacle, you know, as far as if it's not on the parks master plan or something like that. So in this case too, creating a facility, you know, we might have money that could be putting in a gateway feature, but then if we don't have public works or parks or someone who's going to come through to maintain that, there's not a long-term strategy for that improvement. So those are just some of the things to think about. Yes, these are things we can do. It's open. I mean, right now we have Second Street going, so some funds are committed, but the idea of like what you see as a community member or as someone representing businesses that's you know, maybe a failure or a need or something that has to be addressed, talking about it in this forum and then organizing that into some kind of like a recommendation to do something is what you all can do. Absolutely.
Hey, Tori, you're at your 30-minute mark for
Okay.
items 1. And I know that 6.2, we were looking at update current projects.
Okay.
Bylaws. I think that unless anybody has questions about the bylaws, I don't know that we need to go over that in this meeting. I think that's the responsibility of each individual advisory board member to have read those. And as chair, I'd just like to, we'll give everybody till next one, but everybody should have read those and be able to say, I have read those by the next meeting in open session. And if there are any questions, then bring those forward at that time. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. And most of that information, I think we've got a lot of professionals here and if anybody wants some coaching on Robert's Rules of Order, I'm certainly available outside of this meeting to answer questions or offer mentorship in that area. I know them fairly well. Sometimes I get a little rusty too, but
yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so really quickly, so streets, curbs, sidewalks, new streets, bike ped network. So that can be, again, seeing a need and bringing it up and then study it. So for example, like the Second Street piece, we looked at Second Street as a broader connection to the Third Street Bridge. And now it's just a local connection. It was always intended to be just a local contribution to that broader regional piece. It was always intended to be, you know, how do we get, I mean, at the time we were looking at undercrossing Wallace, but there were members of the community that didn't like it. They felt like it would be unsafe and as a shelter for unhoused, or it would just get dark and unsafe and dirty and hard to maintain. So that part was, and it was like by far the most expensive element of the whole thing. But the intent of that was always to try to get bikes and peds over to be able to get to the Salem back and forth easier than you can now. Wallace is quite the obstacle to moving east and west in the district. So we started that by looking at the feasibility study and looking at the network and how it would fit in the network, and then it narrowed it down to what it is now. It's not a crossing there, but I'll talk about that a little bit more. There are already existing facilities that we can enhance to improve and help that connection. But under the streets, public facilities, streetscape, Second Street is capturing a lot of that. So as far as we're still thinking about the gateway signs, public art could be one. We're setting up these streets so they'll have the bold outs similar to downtown. We'll do what we can to set it up so it could be ready for art potentially, but that's one of the things that we can fund in the plan. We could go through, engage the broader community, art network, work with public works and facilities, and then find ways to plug in public art into West Salem area. Touching on Second Street too, we will have additional acorn streetscape style lighting. So what you feel seasonally through Edgewater will be continued in Second Street. So hopefully, the intent is to broaden that district so it's not just the Main Street. I mean, you want to enhance the Edgewater corridor, but the community has always desired to have that kind of downtown feel, kind of repeated into a broader district area within West Salem. So hopefully that, diagonal stretch of Second Street will help kind of enhance that. And then pedestrian, bike, and transit again. So what we're looking at here is if you were to take the Edgewater Parkway path through, if you're going west to east, you're just going, or you can, maybe coming from the Salem side, east to west. There's already a crossing. It keeps you on the safe side of the Edgewater Parkway as you get into the Wallace Road intersection. So you avoid the right turn of all the exiting traffic into West Salem, and you can go under that exit ramp. But what you don't have right now is a clear path. You could go down Musgrave into Wallace Marine Park, or you can make your way back to Wallace and then eventually get to the Industry Railroad Bridge. So ODOT's supportive of enhancing that exit ramp so it's safer with lighting and things, and doing what they can to make that feel like, because there's already investments. It's already a great path through there. It's all signed. It's just not, it's underutilized. Most of the community doesn't even know it's there. I had never walked it. I heard it was there, but I went through there, and it's a really nice facility. But as you go, if you wanted to get to the Union Street Bridge or into Wallace Marine Park, you can walk down Musgrave, or you really don't have an option. So we're looking at engaged the property owners. It would require them to dedicate an easement on their property for a path to go through. So you'd have then a straight connection. So you basically cross Musgrave, continue north and hit the Union Street Railroad Bridge path, and then you could go right and, vice versa, go in or out of Salem. So that's one of those things that we're researching. That's come about by the West Salem Neighborhood Association, us too, expressing a desire, a safe connection, east and west. And then a lot of like Stapleton and other agency members, counselors have expressed that desire. There was a time with the flashing beacon when Wallace Road was getting improved for the ADA and other things. There was a temporary flashing beacon at Second, but that wasn't safe with the amount of traffic that comes there, and it got a hump, so it's hard to see. It was never intended to be permanent. So we're trying to enhance what already exists as a safe route to.
Hey, Tori, I have a quick question. Where is that research at, and what is the timeline for the research and recommendations to be completed?
So the research is just basically really sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's really conceptual right now. It's lines on a map. That's something I learned too when I engaged these properties before, when we were having these flyover routes for the Second Street crossing. It took out like Salem tent awning and the storage unit next to it completely. So, and it looked very finished. So I learned quickly that and it needs to be very basic lines on a map, and that's where we are right now. It's just for the most part the parkway and the crossing to Musgrave is already there. It can be widened and enhanced, lit, safer. So we'll work with ODOT to get basically what we're at now is doing an estimate to see what the cost could be, because then I come back to you guys. So I would say coming back, so one of the property owners was in favor of dedicating right away an easement for the path. The storage unit one I have yet to hear, but it seems like they're a bit resistant. They feel there's been a lot of vandalism and unhoused like activity that they've had to do additional security measures, and so they feel that it just opens it up to more of the same. So there might be some more discussion there, but I'm hoping in the next few months we'll know more. It'd be nice to get an idea, if we can get the support of these property owners to have a path through there. The next step would be understanding what the cost. So we'd just do probably a pretty high level cost to see what it would take to widen the path. As you take that ODOT path under the exit ramp, it narrows. The new improvement area is all wide, and so they had to look to kind of treat the walls as you go into it, widen it, and then add lighting. And then having this additional path connection. So we look at all these things and get a cost, and I'm hoping, I don't know, I would say 6 months. Hopefully I'll have something as far as a cost, and then we could bring to you guys, see if it's something worth doing or maybe taking a position on, and then it would follow that process to the agency. And then we'd have to really get into the details, and we'd have to get engineers to draw it up, make sure that if we widen the path, it doesn't affect the ramp walls, or how that would work, how that ties in, how you can improve the walls. If you can, like one of the walls has graffiti already, so you could maybe do art. So how could you frame that as far as being like, either a sanctioned like public art facility, or when I talk to ODOT, there are other communities that have kind of marked sections where you can create art, your own art kind of a thing. I don't know that it'll get to that point. She can bring up anywhere in Oregon where that was the case, where it was like a section where you could just kind of free for all. But like wall art on a wall could be part of it. Anyway, that's a lot of pieces that could come together potentially, and I would say probably in 6 months we'll have more information on where that's going.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, and then public parking facilities. So that really gets at as this urbanizes funding for a parking structure. We're not to that point right now, but that's in there. Preserve, rehab, redevelop. So that's really improving existing buildings, reuse, infill. So we have the redevelopment grant that's helping basically 2 to 3 applicants per year there. Property acquisition is another one. So these two, like public parking facilities and property acquisition, we haven't really gotten into. We've done more with the grant, try to encourage private development to take on challenging, and that's where you guys came in too. So that's where you're seeing a lot happening right now, actually, with 2nd Street under construction, and you guys made the recommendation and the agency approved the exception criteria. So it's just added incentive for to address these preserve, rehab, redevelop. As we get into these more complicated redevelopment scenarios, there's a little bit more renewal financing that can be applied to those projects. So 2nd Street, you've probably seen this before. Hopefully you can see it okay on your screen. It just is a plan, an aerial view showing the length. So it's girth to Wallace, and it shows the sidewalk. So in areas where you have a narrower sidewalk around on the street, in the neighborhood area will be wider. We'll have street trees, bulb outs. The north side will be all acorn streetscape style lights. On the south side will be your typical Cobra head, just to make sure that you get enough light on for safety. This is just to Patterson. This one it's the same thing though. It's replicated all the way down to Girth. And this is it under construction now. So you're already seeing, on one hand, this Oregon Fruit building was in the right of way for the street anyway, so it had to be impacted, but it really is just moving that project, making it happen sooner. I would say because of the investment of Second Street, the developer bought the site, because the project itself, it's a public facility. So for any developer taking on any of these buildings, they would have had to pay for their half street improvements. And so it's hard when you're doing, let's say you own one building and maybe not the building across the street. So you want to redevelop the site, you're required to put in half street improvements at Second Street. Well, you still only have half street. This kind of goes to John. That's exactly what happened with Goodwill, where there was a Second Street there. They had to build their half street. It feels like more than half the street improvement for access into their site off Second Street. So that same burden existed for all these through here. So with urban renewal, we're able to get in there, recognize that these are aging buildings. It's moving away from food processing. There's a public benefit to having this public facility. And so we went through the process to, just like Jason mentioned, we recognized the need, recognized the future potential, the group did. We studied it, made sure that it fit within the comp plan and fit into the broader transportation system plan, narrowed the scope, got feasibility study, got cost estimate, took it through all the approvals, go out to bid, a public bid to get design and construction. And now we're actually seeing the construction, and it's transferring into the redevelopment, the acquisition, redevelopment of these sites as we speak. So any questions about Second Street? So as far as phasing, you saw Patterson there. So Patterson to Wallace will be done this construction season. There was a desire to hurry and try and get down to Girth. But the reality of it is that with the season, we're going to get into the wet season approaching November. So all the utility work has been done. So that full length from Girth to, where it was needed from Girth to Wallace has been done. And then the street section right now is Patterson to Wallace. It's being improved. Redevelopment. So just really quickly, there's a $300,000 grant. They have 6 months, applicant does, once they get awarded the grant to start work. They have 2 years to complete it. They have to retain the investment. Where that comes in is, obviously a redevelopment of a building is not, it'll be retained for 10 years. This is also geared at taxable manufacturing equipment. So there's still some long-term, like West Salem Machinery and other manufacturers have been making steady investments in their building and their so they continue to add jobs. They continue to make investments in this manufacturing equipment that's taxable. So it's all these things get at one, removing blight, improving the building stock, improving services, but also in this case, adding jobs and maintaining that in the district, adding that public benefit. So these have been the improvements over the years as far as development. That's pretty much what I have as far as like the projects and background. If we want to talk about Second Street a little bit more, I don't know if we want to get into the, let's see, next update on current projects. That's basically the plan. If you have any questions about the renewal plan, so on the agenda, you can click the link. It takes you to the website where you can read the details of the renewal plan. And it also gets into West Salem Redevelopment Advisory Board there.
Thanks, Tori. Any questions on the floor? Thank you for all that information, Tori. That it's always a lot. I mean, one of the things that I love referring back to is the city's website and the West Salem Urban Renewal Area, and just kind of looking at that and really understanding what the objectives are, which, just shortening that are upgrading existing building stock, improving the auto, pedestrian, and bicycle circulation system, which we saw research there. I'm just doing a quick recap. Enhancing streetscape. Tori talked about that in the Second Street project, as far as having cohesiveness within the lighting. And if I'm off anywhere here, Tori, let me know. Conserving open spaces and promoting new quality housing opportunities for a range of household incomes. And so that just, that's really kind of where we can operate in. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I would say, since we're not touching on bylaws, there's a really neat section in Rule 14 of board duties, and it has a long list. Yeah, buildings, retail, pedestrian, amenities, industrial development, housing, transportation. So it's 15 items to be aware of. If you want to refer to that, and I'm sure that everyone's seen bylaws, but that section really is helpful to understand. Jason mentioned having some background and bringing in a recommendation. I would say that's a good list to keep a focus on. But yeah, exactly like you mentioned. I mean, these are exactly the needs that we have in the community, and we have tools. This is a tool to help to help solve some of those.
And I kind of want to gauge with the rest of the group here. I know we can bring in a lot of speakers on updates on projects, find out where research is at, but I think it would be great, one, if we could encourage all the members to be here for the next meeting, but really have that discussion. I'm curious, one, to know why each board member is here, and two, what are the improvements that each participant here wants to see, as somebody who is involved or lives in West Salem or passionate about the growth of West Salem as it pertains to the areas that we can work within the bylaws and urban renewal. Is that, because that could be a lengthy, conversation that could easily take up some time. Is that something that any of the other board members here would like to have?
Yeah, I think that'd be good to get insight into why people are here and what they're interested in doing.
Yeah, Jason, I think something like that is always a good idea. And especially for you, you're an incoming chair, to get a better feel for who we are and why we're here, kind of the things that drive us. And then it also helps us to kind of put thoughts into it and force us to think about what's our real why, right? Now, some of us have been on the board for more than a year, and we have a little bit of experience on what's going on with this. But it's always good to be able to kind of reflect on what we've learned so far and what we know is coming down the pipeline, and say, okay, what else could we do? Or what other ideas should we voice? What kind of seeds can we plant? So yeah, it's not a bad idea at all.
Hey, Tori, is that something that we need a motion on here to place on?
No, so
the agenda?
I'm happy to. Yeah, it didn't really have. It's pretty light as far as we get into October and November. We've already had a lot of different people come in and speak over the calendar year. So yeah, I think that for the next month, that's how you want me to. So what I can do is I can draft an agenda for you, Jason, and you can take a look at it and see, like, I want to change this around, or I want to frame it this way. And then, yeah, we can go from there. I think it'd be a great idea. So my understanding is you want to have a section, maybe in this discussion section of the agenda for next month, go around the room and have basically everyone speak, like all the advisory board members speak to their background, how long they've been on the board, where they're coming from, and what their particular interest is as far as what a need might be. Or I don't know if you want to maybe identify, one or two or three things for them to speak to as far as, what interests or needs do you have coming from the business or community perspective. But yeah, I'd happy to draft that and get it to you, and then we can go back and forth and have it ready for the next meeting.
That would be fantastic. The other thing that I was curious about is the metrics for success of this advisory board. Over the course of 2001, when the West Salem Urban Renewal Plan was created. I mean, that's a long time ago. And so when you look at the website and there's just a short list of projects that are completed, how do we measure success for the board? How do we measure success for the urban renewal plan? And I'd also be interested in kind of like looking at that from the city's perspective. When we go back and look at that plan and say, where are we? How are we doing with this? If we've only completed this many projects, what's the impact of those projects? And does that really adhere to what the stakeholders in 2001 and prior to that who formed that plan, are we still in line with that, the vision of successes that they were seeking for the city of Salem? And so I didn't know if there's really, how do we look at that, not only as a zoom in just to this board, but a zoom out as a full, 23-year measurement?
Yeah, I think so. We could probably, how I hear it, maybe let me know if I'm understanding this correctly. So on one hand, as discussion, so we have the various members discussing their background and identifying maybe a couple of wants or needs in the community in the West Salem urban renewal area, and then as a second piece, seeing a performance metrics as far as like balancing what was intended at the creation of the urban renewal area and then what's been completed. It is hard. So we used to have a website that captured like things like we just hold on to old things. And so we had to move away from that, where we just keep as much current relevant information. So it is hard, I'm sure, for those members that were here before where they fought for something and then it, money went to it. And just like you guys right now, it took years to get to a point of, Second Street and other things happening. And right now it's being highlighted on the website, and then it kind of becomes, one of the listed projects that's done. So I think that's a great idea. I'll see what I can break down there, but do I have that correctly? You want to be able to talk about both things in the next
Yeah, I think
meeting?
how do we measure success, and how do we keep the original aspect of the plan moving forward? The other things that would be, I'm a visual person. I don't know about anybody else, but I know that when the city's doing like research, how the visual perspective of this project was. But I was curious to know, I mean, there's a lot of words here, but did the city pay for a graphic design artist at the time to like bring in, like, I'd love to see if there are images of like, what we think a plaza looks like, what does this, did those drawings kind of, or sketches exist from 2001 during that time period? Was that, because the research was paid for potentially, or that project, I just don't know. And I don't know which of these stakeholders might still be available to come, maybe even give us their opinion on how well that this plan has been followed. I mean, I know Linda Bailey's still around, but most of these names on here, the original stakeholders from the advisory group, I don't really know who they are.
Mm-hmm. I'd have to look back. I know there was an Edgewater study done that talked about housing and how it was supposed to work as far as like mixed use type of building design. And I've never seen anything other than a reference in the plan to a plaza. It's been a while, but I have some familiarity with the Edgewater study. And maybe it was like conceptualized because there's both one, it gets kind of like in the architectural drawings of what buildings should look like and things like that, as far as like being built to the street and not having parking at the street. And we've incorporated a lot of that into the design requirements for the code, for the building, the zoning code for development. But as far, and then what I might be, I'd have to look back, in the Edgewater set, there was probably like bubbles that showed like how certain parts of the area should be considered, and maybe there's a plaza section in there. I'm not sure. I'd have to look back.
I mean,
But
if
I
you,
haven't seen anything as far as like art. It never got to the level of detail where it was very specific in size and feel. My understanding was maybe a bubble on like an Edgewater area potentially.
yeah, sometimes I know with plans just come kind of, you know, just an idea,
Yeah.
a visual idea of what somebody thought that would look like in 2001 versus where we're actually headed now. And so I was just curious. I just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
Sorry, I'm taking notes.
I mean, if there's nothing else on the discussion items 6, 1, and 2 in regards to the urban renewal plan and bylaws, we'll move forward. Anybody have any comments, questions? Great. Latest from West Salem organizations. I don't think we have any. Do we have anybody here from the West Salem Business Association?
I can give a quick update of what they've done recently.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, so back on the 24th, they had let's see, it was a membership meeting. It was like an annual meet and greet, and they held that over at Red Hawk Winery. And if you haven't been out to Red Hawk Winery, it's on the very north end of Wallace. It's off Michigan City Lane. Really beautiful area over there. Sounds like there was some pretty good attendance. My wife and I and the kids, we were out, we were camping at the time, so we couldn't make it. But yeah, it sounds like it was a lot of fun. Now that that's over, they're back to the regular schedule. I was trying to look up in my calendar, but I think it's like third Wednesday of the month, something like that. Don't quote me on that.
Third Thursday.
Third Thursday, yeah. I knew it was something like that. At Roth's IGA from 11:45 to 1 o'clock.
Super. Thank you, Jeremy. The only information I have on West Salem Neighborhood Association, unless anybody else wants to step in here, is that their nominations are still open for elections for officers. So if anybody's interested, that meeting is, I believe, tonight at Roth's IGA from 6 to 8 p.m. And there's also quite a bit of discussion happening on the recent decision from the City Council on the Dokes Ferry. I believe it's the Titan development, Titan Apartments. So there are a lot of strong opinions there. And Edgewater Partners is now meeting at the Corner Art Gallery and Boutique, which is at 1105 Edgewater Northwest, and McNary is the cross street. That is, and I want to say it's like it's also the third or the fourth. No, I think it's the fourth. And Jeremy, actually, I think that the West Salem Neighborhood or Business Association is the fourth Thursday, because it's also the same day as Edgewater Partners. Both on the same day, you can attend the morning meeting for Edgewater Partners at the Corner Art Gallery, and then go to Roth's for lunch for the West Salem Business Association.
Now, Jason, real quick, do you know the time for the Edgewater partnership?
9 a.m.
9 a.m. Okay, thank you.
And entrance is on the side door off McNary.
Perfect.
We kind of already discussed next meeting topics, but if there's anything else anybody wants to throw in.
The only thing that I would add is I'm curious, and maybe Tori has some insight into this as well, is how do we actually fill out the board? Because we have 3 vacant spots right now, and it'd be great to get a full board with, you know, varying viewpoints and perspective things. So, and I'm not exactly sure how we what the outreach looks like to get those spots filled.
Yeah, if you guys have the chance, as you participate in various groups, broader Salem, so we have 2 at large, so that can be anyone from the city, or like the whole area of the city limits. But yeah, if you have organizations you participate in, the ones that were listed, business association, neighborhood association, Edgewater Partners, if you want to help promote it, we do what we can to reach out to various people when we attend events. We'll do what we can to let other stakeholders know that there's openings. For the most part, I don't know. There was a lot of activity as far as applications going into COVID, and then COVID and post-COVID, it's been, I don't know, people are just being peeled away, maybe doing different things. Maybe, they're too busy in other boards or commissions or organizations. But we've really never had a problem. This is probably, it hasn't been too long that we've had openings, but this is the most we've had for a little while. So I'll do what I can to keep reaching out to those people, those groups. But if you guys can take the time to, if you have the opportunity, let people know that we have openings, that'd be great.
Hey, Tori, there's specifications around those opens. So, are they resident? Do you know which ones they are? I think one of them is the river, or the riverfront.
Downtown. Yeah. So we have 2 at large. So that could be anywhere. Those are the most flexible and usually the easiest to fill. And then we have the riverfront downtown that Jason mentioned. We also have one, probably the hardest one to fill. And there was a discussion years ago about maybe changing that. And the group, the advisory board decided to retain it as a resident in the original area. That one it'd be great to have someone that reflects like living in Edgewater, and maybe that will change with Second Street happening. And my understanding is mixed use buildings going in where you have maybe some apartments. Maybe that will be an easier one to fill, but right now it's been one of the more harder. That one's been the most vacant the longest. It's a hard one to fill. And then Linda, remind me, I think there might be one. So there's maybe another business one within the urban renewal area. I think there's 4 that are open.
There are 4 vacancies, and you basically outlined them all with the 2 at large, and then the business and property owner within the riverfront downtown URA. And then there would be an opening for a resident within the West Salem URA. And you're right, that one is oftentimes difficult to fill. Something I could do is follow up with our communications team. They are oftentimes looking for social media posts and whatnot. And I used to get asked a lot about, which boards and commissions had additional vacancies and whatnot, so they could get the word out.
Great.
And I would be happy to speak with the communications team about putting something out there very soon about West Salem.
So I'm only seeing on the website right now, it lists we have 2 at large and 1 resident living within the West Salem Neighborhood Association. That's all I see available right now.
Okay, we just did some updating, so I'll go back and look at that, John. Thank you for pointing it out, and I'll make sure it's completely up to date.
Cool, thanks.
Great. If there's nothing, any other comments for the good of the order? Tori, thank you very much for all of the information. And you and I can sidebar later for the next agenda. John, thank you for bringing up the vacancies. Linda, next meeting, we'll follow up with you on maybe how those social posts went and update on the website. And I just need a motion for the meeting to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Thanks so
All
much.
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.